All right. Thank you very much for having me. As was said, I'm completing my PhD, and I am also a board member for the editorial board for Multiplay, and I am currently recently made the chair for the International Game Developers Association LGBTQ plus special interest group. I thought I would just put this in. I don't know if it's necessary, but just as a warning, there is going to be some discussions of and depictions of genitalia. If anybody's played Cyberpunk, like it's from the get-go. So just to be like making sure that people are familiar with that. So just as a way of introduction, my research, this is part of a larger research project that I'm doing for my dissertation. It's a brief thing on my chapter. Sorry, I also just wanted to make sure I set a timer so I can make sure I am running on time. So yeah, I'm looking at queer subjectivities in video games and looking at how they emerge and form both through in-game elements and entanglements between queer players and games that they play. This generally revolves around spatio-temporal relations between queer individuals or communities and the space that they inhabit. In this case, I'm focusing specifically on video games. The themes that I am looking at, as you can see here, and these are the main 4 chapters that I'm dealing with. They stem all not just from the relations between queer bodies and identities, but also my own, being both queer and a native of the Republic of Ireland. And I make a distinction in my research more generally between the idea of being native versus Indigenous. There's queer histories, relating to the body archive, imperialism, conceptualizations of sexuality and gender, Irish identities and communities, and the control of queer bodies. Throughout, I am interested in looking at these from feminist materialists theories, which I prefer to pluralize, as I think it denotes the continuously renegotiated elements between the self and others, both human and non-human. And I delve into, in my research as well, a distinction that I make between feminist materialist approach versus a post-human approach. Through a feminist materialist approach, I bring my own experiences as a cisgender man who identifies as GBMSM, meaning gay, bisexual, and men who have sex with men, into the foreground. While I provide an examination of queer representation in Cyberpunk 2077, my analysis of queer elements in the game is limited to the perspective provided by my own embodied experiences of gender and sexuality, as in my own experiences being cisgender. Specifically, I analyze how cisgender entanglements with various gendered elements present in Cyberpunk 2077 lead to cisgendered interpretations of gendered in-game elements and how entanglements with them create an understanding of trans subjectivities. For this, I draw on Singh's consideration of the body archive, which positions the human body as a site of thinking, feeling that opposes the foreclosure of reason. Work that has already been done in the chapter revolves around detailing the history of cyberpunk as a subgenre of science fiction, arguing that it centers dystopian speculation, and commenting on the potential futures from a contemporary positionality. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about that here, but that's kind of the background of what I'm doing. Also, apologies, it should be a sad ghost, but I couldn't find a picture for one, so that's what we're working with. The game represents trans identities through a limited number of elements, which, when encountered in a dystopian setting as a cisgender player, I argue limits trans potentialities in favor of constructing a singular and objectively understood trans subject or identity. This trans subject stands in contrast to any conception of trans and queer identities that are materially fluid, limiting the potentialities to contemporary and singular trans identity. This identity is situated as a constituent element of a dystopian text, which situates the trans subject as itself dystopian. I do not claim here that there is a fundamental nature to trans identities that is being obfuscated in Cyberpunk 2077. Rather, through the consideration of queer entanglements, I argue that the treatment of trans identities in Cyberpunk 2077 both presupposes that there is a fundamental nature to transness and reifies us through the presentation of a trans identity. For the framing of this, I present a synthesis of queer and Marxist theories, positioning Cyberpunk 2077's positioning of trans identities as singular, reified, and oriented around other contemporary reifications of trans identities. For this, I am specifically looking at Edelman's queer negativity, Munoz's queer utopian theory, Ahmed's queer orientations, and then Adorno et al.'s ideas of commodification and reification. The big thing that I use to link all of this together, as well as with my other chapters, is, as it says in there, the queer spectre. I adapt Derrida's ideas around ontologies and his figure of the spectre. Drawing from such Marxist theories here, haunting the game by denoting the lost futures of trans potentialities, reifying trans identities to a singular form, standing in contradiction to queer spatio-temporalities. I approach these Marxist theories diffractively to argue that Cyberpunk 2077 reifies queer identities through the constructive of an objective trans identity, subjectivizing trans individuals and communities by doing so. Through the figure of the spectre, and in this case, through the figure of the spectre in this case, trans and queer potentialities are undermined in favor of the trans subject. So moving on to the game. So just as an overview, I won't get too much, you've already had it. Cyberpunk 2077, first-person role-playing game developed by CD Projekt Red, initially released in 2020 with a number of updates released, which I have listed there. It's based off of the Steam data. It's set in Night City. It draws on a multitude of elements in the cyberpunk genre to render the game's dystopian environment, characters and narrative. This includes body modification, the blurring and overlapping of a physical and a digital world, and the inclusion of cyberware. So in my other work, I argued that these stem from like the history of the genre. The development, CD Projekt Red collaborated with the TTRPG creator Mike Pondsmith, and it's positioned as a video game sequel to Cyberpunk 13, which is part of his production company's Cyberpunk tabletop game series. Incorporating various elements from this series, Cyberpunk 2077 also presents you with a variety of themes common to the cyberpunk genre, such as technological innovation, corporate feudalism, and social cohesion or incohesion. Using the table on the left, you can see the Cyberpunk source book presents differing figures of male and female presenting characters, the latter typically presented in revealing clothing and sexually suggestive positioning. This, I believe, informs the game's more general establishment and use of gendered elements in the game, and speaks to how elements in the cyberpunk genre more generally may establish gendered subjectivities specifically set around a traditional gender binary. Moving to the character creation process in Cyberpunk 2077 then, while sex can be engaged with regardless, relationships can only be established with one of four characters dependent on the body type chosen, male or female, for V. These options rely on binary choices regarding sex or gender presentation that are made from the very beginning and can't be changed. Specific options provided for sex or gender presentation which provide limited flexibility, and there are no additional options for sex or romance, including those with trans characters. While sex and romance are not dependent on genitalia options, the options that are provided around this category serve to further highlight the gendering of available options. They also serve as a particularly salient example of how the game incorporates patriarchal assumptions regarding masculine and feminine embodiments. More extensive character customization options are provided related to the penis rather than to the vagina or the underwear, for instance. It is 36 options to 6 options to 1. And it also doesn't include other options, including piercings, variations, intersex options, or those which indicate trans embodiments. And I've even noted down even different underwear styles in brackets, maybe a thong, for instance. Like there could be much, much more. It stands that there is a wide potential for the inclusion of additional options. However, masculine genital features are given priority, and I see the character creation process in Cyberpunk 2077 as sex or gendered, orienting you not only towards a binary sex or gender system, but also one which is inherently set within a patriarchal structure. Right, I've got 5 minutes left, so I can do it. Right, the next thing I want to draw attention to is the Mix It Up ad that I also showed in the previous slides. Shown throughout Night City, the image depicts a trans feminine person drinking from a can with an erect penis, implying to therefore be, quote unquote, mixing it up. Unger argues that a common side effect of estrogen therapy, for instance, for assigned male at birth or AMAB trans people seeking transfeminization is issues around erectile dysfunction. To me, this shows that there is a contradiction between the image and the material realities for AMAB trans feminine people. That then brings into question what the purpose of advertisement actually is. And I would argue that I don't necessarily think it is a good faith depiction of trans feminine embodiments. Associations between the erect penis and feminine features, for instance, let this add feed into the character creation process in the preferred presentation of masculine features and genitalia. Contextualizing this as a trans subject in the Mix It Up advertisement, I believe this subject reifies trans bodies and identities, where trans feminine embodiments in particular are minimized to reductive interpretations of male violence. This related subjectivization of trans people and communities is accomplished through the objectification and reification of trans embodiments. I relate this to a synthesis between Lucas describing conceptions of reification and Ahmed's conception of orienting objects. As Lucas describes, the phenomenon of reification relies on a commodity structure that fetishizes relations between people to construct a phantom objectivity, an autonomy that seems so strictly rational and honor-bracing as to conceal every trace of its fundamental nature. Ahmed then describes orienting objects as an effect of towardsness. It is the thing towards which I am directed, and which, in being positioned as a thing, as being something or another for me, takes me in some direction rather than others. So, to conclude, the consideration of trans entanglements with Cyberpunk 2077 highlights the labor required by queer people to seek out and develop queer potentialities in video games. Because obviously Sedgwick's ideas on paranoid and reparative readings collectively look at how queer individuals look to both protect themselves from the lack of queerness in texts and also add queer or queerer perspectives. Practices have the potential to reveal the many ways selves and communities succeed in extracting sustenance from the objects of a culture, even if a culture whose avowed desire has often been not to sustain them. Synthesizing Brad and Kosowski Sedgwick then, collectively, I believe they reveal the labor required from queer players to expand on the queer potentialities that are presented in the game. Although the game tends towards presenting queer elements from a dystopian perspective, queer entanglements between you, i.e. the queer player, and your avatar present the opportunity for materially significant readings of the game, readings which expand potential limitations. In Cyberpunk 2077, such a perspective would facilitate considerations of how trans players may challenge the reification of the trans subject through entanglements with the game, expanding beyond a singular subjectivity. However, this also illustrates the labor placed on queer players in order to expand these potentialities. In contrast to Cyberpunk 2020 as a TRPG, the character creation process of Cyberpunk 2077 presents a set number of character appearance options, including options set around gendered categorizations. So as a cis player who is extensively engaged with the game, I argue that encounters with this trans subject reveal its framing as a dystopian element of the game. I accept that the realization of materially significant queer embodiments has the potential to meaningfully undermine the limitations of the game. However, while developers may look to incorporate greater capacities for queerness in games of this genre, the limitations present in the character creation process, environment, and narratives of Cyberpunk 2077 illustrates that work will also be placed on the players to provide queer or queerer perspectives. Thank you very much.